No matter who you are or where you go, heading outside is always worth it. Welcome to Humans Outside, where we're using the Humans Outside 365 Challenge to build a life around spending time in nature while learning from fascinating outdoor-minded guests. I'm Amy Bouchatz. I've let curiosity be my guide as a journalist for 18 years. But life, including my husband's war injuries, had burnt us out. So we moved sight unseen to Alaska to see if a change of scenery and new focus on outdoors was just the shift we needed. Since September 2017, I've spent at least 20 consecutive minutes outside every single day, no matter what, to explore how nature can change my life. Ready to hear from experts and outdoor lovers who make heading into nature just a part of who they are while we work to do the same? Let's go! If you have been listening to Humans Outside for any length of time, you might have picked up on the fact that I am a runner. Endurance events like running are my favorite way to test myself outside. How far can I go? How high? How long? But one of the things I've noticed over my more than 5 years of spending time outside every day, trying many, many new things, some of which were very fun and pleasant, and some of which were not so pleasant, is that the whole experiment has helped me become more mentally tough from a regular whole life perspective. But what is toughness really? And how do you best foster it? And how can outside toughness be used in our everyday inside lives? That's something author and track coach Steve Magness is here to talk to us about today. Steve's most recent book, Do Hard Things, lays out a framework for building that toughness. He's coached elite athletes, including Olympians, and written for or appeared in a slew of magazines and newspapers nationwide, talking about performance and toughness. And today he's going to help us learn about what it takes to get tough and how to chase a framework for making it happen. Steve, welcome to Humans Outside.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Well, I really appreciate your time. Like we were talking about right before we started recording, I have been listening to your book while I run in various forms of toughness in that moment. So inspirational.
I love it. That's when my worlds collide, when people are runners and listening to the stuff that I write. So I couldn't ask for a better audience.
Perfect. All right. So we always start our conversations with our guests here, imagining ourselves in our favorite outdoor space, maybe doing something we love out there or just hanging out and having a chat. So were that true? Where are we with you today?
Oh gosh. So my favorite outdoor space is actually a mile away from my house. Maybe because it's like comfortable, but there's this local park called Burroughs Park where I've done so many runs. I probably know every inch of the park. You know, I walk my dog there, my wife and I, every day. But it's just got these amazing trails that are just kind of my second home where wherever I'm, you know, whenever I'm kind of down or what have you, I just go to the park. So that's where we would be.
Awesome. All right. So we're hanging out in the park. So let's talk about toughness. You have a background in running, obviously, and for most of us who run, that's something that's done outside. But I'm wondering if you can give us a little additional background. How did you become someone who likes to spend time outside? And is that something that resonates for you outside of the running activity or world?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've always been an outdoors person, particularly growing up in sport. I was the kid who my parents just, you know, I'd come home from school and then I'd be like out the door as fast as I possibly could to either go ride bikes or play baseball or football or whatever have you. So being outside has always been kind of central to who I am. And I think outside of a running context, you know, early on in my kind of career as an athlete, it was like, oh, I'm going to go participate in the sport. But as I've kind of grown and developed, it's not just running or sport, it's getting outside in nature, which really kind of makes me feel alive, but also provides this kind of calming presence and perspective so that I make sure, you know, no matter what, and my wife is the same way, that we're getting outside and in nature and spending time again in the trails or walking around local lakes. And unfortunately, we live in Houston, Texas, so there are no mountains to climb here, but we find our way outside as much as possible. And actually, maybe to tie it to something non-athletic for your readers, our listeners is being outside is a central component of writing. So
Mm-hmm.
my secret to like writer's block or whenever I get stuck is I just put the computer down, my notebooks away, and I go for a walk.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
often it's like you get done with the walk and it's your mind is clear and you have this clarity and you're able to, do the work that you need or finish that chapter or whatever have you.
Absolutely. It's funny because, as people who obviously like endurance outside and maybe have a penchant for that lack of oxygen feeling that you have when you're really working hard, to hear us both say that slowing down is important and being present outside in a way that does not involve hard work. That's interesting.
Yeah, it is. And, I think if you told 18-year-old Steve, he'd be like, what are you talking about? Right? But as you kind of grow and develop and hopefully get some wisdom, I think, again, there's research behind this, that being outside in nature is restorative. And we now more than ever, where we have a busy, kind of chaotic life and we spend way too much time online, it's almost even more imperative now that you have, again, some time where you're spending it outside in nature. And to me, it's also, I know sometimes I like listening to audiobooks or podcasts on walks, but I also make it like almost a rule where it's like, no, I need time where there's no devices, no electronics. It's just like me, hiking through the woods. And again, it's just that kind of refreshing and almost resets my brain and gets it away from kind of like that internet brain that we all have, that is kind of like my dog chasing squirrels, where it just kind of bounces all over the place.
Yeah, the perpetual scroll, right? Perpetual scroll brain, where you're just like constantly moving through content and never having the presence to stop and pause on one thing. In fact, how often do we, just literally on the internet or on our phones, scroll through things so fast, you're like, oh, wait, what was that? And then you can't find it. I feel like that happens in my brain too, that I'm moving so fast that I almost literally scroll past a thought in my mind and I'm, oh no, what happened to that? And can't go back and find it. But when I'm outside and I have that presence and that intentionality, that doesn't seem to happen as much.
Exactly. And then, to me, it comes back to, well, what are we training our brain to do? Well, in the everyday life where we're just kind of on that endless scroll, and I'm as guilty as anybody, like our brain's like being like, oh, this is the food that we eat, which is like scroll, 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 candy. And I see outside as like, that is my nutritious, like real food. Like if I don't eat that, then my teeth are going to rot. And in this sense, it's like if I don't get that, then my brain's going to think the only way to experience life is through this kind of scroll mode.
Yeah.
And that's why I think it's, again, more important now than ever to be very intentional and deliberate on that. And I'm not saying like go live out in the woods and never use technology. I'm saying, technology is now a part of life. And, for many of us as an author, I have to promote things on social media. If I don't have a job. So it's a part of life and work as well. So I just need to acknowledge that and then do things like, again, spending time in nature, taking my dog on walks, like getting disconnected while I'm doing that. Like that is the antidote to make sure that my brain doesn't, lose itself on the online world.
Absolutely. I think one thing that the endless scroll does not facilitate is building toughness, because of course tough things don't scroll by, right? They are sort of present. So you've written a lot about toughness. Obviously your new book is specifically about that, Do Hard Things. So maybe start by telling us, what is toughness? What is resilience? And how are they different?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'll start with this. Resilience is essentially, if you look at the definition in the research, it is going through something stressful and then bouncing back to that normal place. Okay. So it's coming back out. Toughness to me is kind of this kind of nebulous, holistic term that we just kind of throw around and say like, oh, people are tough. So I kind of tried to frame it in almost like a decision-making framework where I'm saying, toughness is about the decisions you make. So it's feeling some sort of stress, anxiety, discomfort. And then instead of jumping straight from, I feel this stress, to like, what's the easiest answer, the easiest escape? is creating that space so that you can navigate and make a thoughtful decision. So in many ways, I know we kind of harped on this, but the phones provide a great example, because is it your phone buzzes and beeps and you feel that anxiety of like, oh gosh, I got a notification, I should check it and start scrolling? Or do you have that space and that presence of mind to be like, you know what? My phone isn't the answer right now. That can wait. I'm going to focus and shift my attention to the thing that actually matters, and pay attention to my phone when it is important to me and when I choose to do that.
Yeah. So I'm just, poor phone. I think I'm really going to beat up on this guy today. And like you, I am on social media. It's part of my job. And as part of my Humans Outside 365 challenge, where we go outside every day and encourage that, we actually loop in social media for that and post a photo a day, just sort of as a log almost. In part because when I first started to do this, it's been a while since I talked about this, but when I first started to do this experiment in 2017, I wanted a way for me to log what I'd been doing. And I knew that I would never sit down and journal this every day. Please. That ain't happening. But Instagram provided an ideal journal for me so that I could personally, for me, look back at what I had done on this day last year. Again, I'm like making this scrolling motion while I'm talking to you. It's like such a part of who we are now. But so we loop that in. Right. But when I am outside and I'm doing something hard, I'm envisioning myself hiking up this particular peak we have. It's called Lazy Mountain, biggest misnomer ever. There's a annual mountain race that goes up it that I do. And when we're training on that, I mean, this sucker is straight up. OK. And how many times have I been like, oh, look at this beautiful vista. I must take a picture as an excuse to stop moving. Like, need a break. Handy excuse, looking at the scenery. And I've started to realize that this is the same tell of my friends, that if they're having a hard time, they're like, oh, look at that beautiful view. My goodness. It's just because we're tired, right? But knowing that that's happening and that I'm like looking for distraction is what I'm trying to say. I can push through that and say, okay, like I know that I'm looking for a reason to stop hiking right now or stop running. So maybe I step back what I'm doing and be present and just move through it.
I love that example, because if you look at, again, the research, the best performers is what it shows is they have that presence of mind and that ability to read their signals, right? Because it's like what you're doing there is you're saying, oh, this is why I want to stop, and this is why I do this. You have this awareness, which then allows you to make that decision. Right? It allows you to say, you know what? This is why I'm deciding to stop. It's not because like I actually maybe want to, stop and take this view. It's because like it gives me this break to do. And sometimes, it might be the right decision to stop. But sometimes the decision is no, like let's keep going and push through. And that to me is about, what toughness really is about, is like having that awareness and developing that awareness and that skill so that we are actively making that choice and like aware that we are doing so that we can, again, that choice aligns with maybe our goals or values or the purpose of that hike or whatever difficult thing that you're doing.
Exactly. It's having the presence to understand why you're making a decision, not necessarily saying a decision is good or bad. It's just knowing why you're doing it.
Exactly. And I think this is the point that a lot of people struggle is, unfortunately, in society and as humans, we tend to simplify things into good or bad and want that dichotomy. But the reality is, in the moment, like, you have no idea. Like, I don't necessarily know what a good or a bad decision is. To use the running example, like, I could drop out of a race and it could be a bad decision because it was like, oh, I didn't meet my goal. Or it could have been the best decision because maybe in the next, 100 meters I was going to get hurt or something like that or step in a hole. But I have no idea. So I think the judgment often comes after the fact. And what we just want to make sure that we're doing is that we're aware of the decisions that we're making and that we're consciously choosing that and okay with it given the feedback and the situation that we're in.
So I think that's a great pivot into one of my other questions, which is, what do we get wrong about toughness? and about making ourselves tough, but also about making our kids tough. Because, I mean, behold the number of times that I've taken my children on a hike and that said something to like, stop whining or just walk faster. I have one child who I swear to God was hiking backwards. He was so slow. Like, we have not only progressed on the trail, we have descended while trying to ascend. So, but like, we view that in this framework of you have to be tough, you have to push through. So what are we getting wrong about this concept of toughness when we look at it that way?
Yeah, so what we get wrong is the nuance. And the nuance around it is this, is we often encapsulate toughness as this idea of like, no matter what, persevere, push through, like put your head down, grit your way through it, forget everything else you're feeling, just like get to the goal. And the problem is, A, that's not what life is. And then B, looking at kind of that decision-making framework we talked about, is toughness is about like having the space to create and find and have the awareness to make that choice. So when we just say persevere, 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 essentially what we're doing is we're handing people a hammer and we're saying this will solve all of your problems. Like whenever you're in a difficult moment, just use the hammer and bulldoze through. And the problem is, as we all know, like that tool isn't for everything. Right. Sometimes we need to use a different tool to solve the difficult moment. And I love that you asked the question on parenting, because the research in the parenting world makes this very clear to me. And it's fascinating. And essentially it says that a lot of times in parenting, we mistake and we think that to create tough, resilient, disciplined kids, we need a high level of what they call demandingness, which is, you know, that strict, disciplinarian, set high expectations. But what the research says, if you just have that on your own, it actually backfires. Because kids don't learn the skills to navigate that thing. They just realize like, oh, mom and dad are yelling at me or telling me I'm going to be punished. So I'm just going to try my best to like survive this situation instead of figuring out how to navigate it. Mm-hmm. And the research is, again, very clear where it says it's not necessarily that you can't have high expectations, that you shouldn't like push your kids to take on challenges. It's that you need to accompany that with a high level of support or responsiveness, meaning that you're creating the environment where kids can take risks and sometimes fail, but that's where they learn and grow. You're creating the environment where kids know that they can explore because like mom or dad is gonna like fulfill their basic needs and not abandon them or not like push them off, punish them, and forget about them. So it really is kind of marrying those two and finding that nuance in that middle ground where the kind of magic happens.
Mm-hmm. So in your book, you've set out 3 pillars for toughness. Can you describe, like, walk us through what those are? Give us this framework. How do you build toughness?
Yeah. So the first pillar, I call it ditch the facade, embrace reality, which is essentially what we often think of toughness is we think, oh, we need to be confident, which is absolutely true to kind of tackle difficult things. But we go about it the wrong way. We kind of develop this kind of, or think we should have like this external confidence that is based on bravado and telling ourselves, I've got this, no problem. But what the research and best practices of performers shows us is that it's really about embracing reality. So having a clear-eyed vision on what is the task at hand or the challenge I'm facing, and what am I capable of? Like, what tools do I have? What practice have I done to prepare me for this moment? It's not, confidence isn't saying, I'm going to win this or conquer this no matter what. It's saying, you know what, I've prepared. I have some tools to be able to take this thing on. Let's go explore and find out. So that's kind of number one. The second pillar that I think is really important is one I hinted at, which is listening to your body. Which is often, again, in this kind of old school model of toughness, we kind of tell people, you know, ignore your feelings, emotions, or like, you know, no crying in baseball, whatever you want to use as your kind of example. And again, the experience and research shows us that often if we understand our inner world and kind of the signals it's sending, then we're able to navigate it. No different than the example you used earlier where you're like, oh, this is why I'm stopping. It's because my brain is trying to convince me that, you know, I need to stop because I'm tired. It's not because I'm actually in danger. So you were able to read those signals and decide, hey, you know, in this case, this is a false alarm. I should let this one float on by like, your crazy aunt or uncle ranting on Facebook. Like, just let it go. Don't
Well,
comment.
to be clear, I do periodically actually stop for the photo. Like, you know what? We're doing this now.
Right.
I don't let it float by all the time.
Yeah, but and no, and I think that's important because that's what it is. It's like listening to your body. Whenever I tell people, they're like, "Oh, I should pay attention to all my feelings." I'm like, "No, you decide. You get to say this is feedback." Like sometimes I'm gonna listen to it, sometimes I'm not, and like again, it's that decision making. It's not pushing it away, ignoring it. So the example here is if you were tired and you just said, "You know what? No matter what, I'm gonna just push through, ignore, ignore, ignore." Well, sometimes maybe that signal that is telling you to stop is like one that is actually, you should listen to in the sense that it's saying, hey, you're pushing too far and you're not going to be able to make your goal unless you slow down. Or you need to stop and take a break and drink some water or eat a banana or whatever because like you need the fuel and we're running low on fuel and we're telling you this and you're not listening. So that listening is really important. And then the third pillar that I talk about is respond instead of react, which is essentially often in these situations of discomfort, we get into reactive mode, which is like, what's the easiest, like simplest solution to the anxiety, the stress, the discomfort we're feeling? We reach for the candy instead of the vegetables. And what I'm trying to tell people is like, hey, in those moments, don't just get caught reacting. Like, practice slowing the world down a little bit, creating some space so you can thoughtfully respond to the problem instead of just, again, going for the easy, quick solution.
Which admittedly gets harder when you're tired. I mean, for me, that's the big thing, exhaustion. I mean, like all humans also enjoy not being hungry, but as you're talking, I am having this flashback to this admittedly, for most people, crazy thing I attempted last year. So I attempted this 100-mile race last year. Okay. And it started at 3 p.m. It goes over a mountain pass. It gains 10,000 feet and it has no aid stations with the exception of your husband meeting you at the parking lot at mile 43. Okay. And so this is admittedly a very tough race. And I, at about mile 60, decided that I was all done. And how that manifested was I did a lot of crying and walking. So now I've been up all night, which I had never done before. And I was tired, right? And what I did was exactly what you just described. I reacted. I reacted. I didn't stop to say, okay, what's going on here? How can you respond? I purely was like, I'm tired. Now I'm 2 years old. Now I'm just going to walk and cry, which is precisely what I did. And so I actually dropped. There's a turnaround spot at the 70-mile mark and like another parking lot loop. And I was like, hi, friends, I'm done. But I said that while crying. And then I cried in my van for a little while. So all that to say, that is, I think, exactly what you're talking about, this reaction. Now, obviously, like, I was under a lot of stress. I was very tired. Like, there's lots and lots of reasons to react, right? Perfectly legitimate reasons. But if I had learned prior to this moment what you're saying about responding versus reacting, I would have maybe had the presence of mind to do that instead of just go to the easiest thing when you're exhausted and apparently a toddler, which is to, cry. So...
Yeah, I love that example and you explaining it as a toddler because that's kind of what happens. So not to go too far in the weeds, but if you look at what happens under extreme fatigue or stress in the brain, it is like our emotional, reactive parts of the brain just like take over. Our kind of rational executive function just plummets and goes down. So of course we kind of act like a toddler, right? Because like that's what our brain is kind of commanding us to do. And the brilliant part is I'm not offering any, wonderful one size fits all, solution. But what we can do is get a little bit back, a little bit more control and kind of get that rational brain back online. So there's a lot of, again, some tactics and tools that you can use in that moment where it's like, okay, I'm clearly reacting, but like, how do I get a little bit of space to get through this spot? And you see this in ultra distance running all the time. because like you're gonna go through those ebbs and flows. So even things as simple as like, well, my inner dialogue is spiraling and how I'm talking to myself is all negative. Like, how do I get another voice in here? Or like, how do I remind myself why I signed up for this thing in the first place? And it is a battle, but like there are small moments where you're just looking for that in where you're just like, okay, how do I get my rational brain back online and let my toddler like stop crying and throwing a tantrum a little bit and get a little bit of quiet so I can think again.
Oh, 100%. And, obviously I've done a lot of thinking about this in the last year because that's what we do. But I don't know that, well, two things. I am certain that experience has made me perhaps more tougher and more resilient, right? Now I know that happens. And now I know, due to thinking about it a lot, what I might be able to do about that in the moment. The second thing is, I don't know that I could feel that way today without having gone through it then. And I know for a fact that people sort of warned me that might happen. And, oh, you have to have a why. I remember having a phone call with a friend who just finished Leadville. And she explained how she has her why. And I heard that, but I did not hear that. And so in that moment, I didn't have that, exactly what you're describing, that ability to step in and insert some non-toddler talk here to walk myself back off the edge. And by the time I realized I had gone off the ledge, I no longer cared. I had decided that this is who we are now and this is how it's going to be. And I, by the way, think that my friend's husband and son were like, oh, whoa, like, what is happening here? They were legitimately concerned about me. And my poor husband, who's probably seen that side of me before, cannot confirm or deny, was probably like, oh, great.
Yeah, that's hilarious. Looking back, I'm sure not in the moment, but you're spot on. Is sometimes we have to experience this for ourselves to conceptualize it and like it really take it in. It's one thing reading or listening or hearing it from a friend, but that's why I think it's important to like put yourself in these situations and sometimes fail, because like those are the moments that are going to push you to seek like, okay, I really got to figure this out, and like, oh, this is what I was missing or this is what I was wrong. But the other thing that I'd love to comment there on is that why, that purpose is one of the best performance enhancers we have, where it does this great thing where it almost in your brain, it says like, oh, like I know we're suffering. I know this is really difficult, but remember, we signed up for this for a reason. Remember, we're doing this not just because we like suffering or, for whatever reason to get some accolade, but because it has some deeper meaning for us. And that is going to, free us up to perform a little bit, as well as give us some perspective in those moments where everything is just kind of spiraling around us.
And the thing I love about that is you and I are talking about this in the context of this admittedly a little crazy thing that I decided to do. Okay. But you don't have to be facing something crazy, like trying to go 100 miles to use that tool. You don't have to be out there summiting Everest to have a why and to use that to push through discomforts, big or small. So we talk a lot here about building this habit of going outside every day. Well, sometimes that's not so easy. Here in Alaska, we have times that I jokingly explain as providing free sandblasting to your face. So it's 60-mile-an-hour winds. It is sub-zero temperatures. It's all happening at the same time. And you have to want to go outside every day, and you best have a why, because otherwise you're not going to have the desire even to put on the jacket, find all your layers, and go out and do that. Anywhere in the country has unpleasant weather sometimes, and there will always be things in your life that make you want to stay inside or not do something. And so having that why, like, this is why I'm doing this, this is why I'm building this habit, this is why I have this habit, this is why I've kept this habit, can help you go and do that stuff even when it gets hard. So this does not have to apply to doing crazy things. It can just be everyday life.
Exactly. I'm so glad you brought up that point, because there's actually some fascinating psychology behind this that shows even in our everyday work. So, for example, I remember reading a research study on hospital janitor workers, where instead of, often janitors are kind of low status, lower pay, etc. And I remember the researchers came in with the hospital and they said, listen, you guys are so vital to this. Like, if you don't do your job, disease spreads in this hospital and people literally die. And what they found is when they changed their titles, when they reframed their job, those cleaning crews, what happened is their job satisfaction went up, their level of burnout went down, and they actually enjoyed and found some meaning in the work that they were doing because they changed their mindset on like, oh, okay, you're right, like there's data on this, like people could die if like we don't clean things up because germs spread in hospitals. And I think that again kind of gets at this idea that if you can make it where the thing that you're doing has a purpose beyond just kind of your kind of self, it often provides that performance booster that we need and love. And the other thing that is interesting is that reminders work really well in this. So it's not just having it in your head. So again, there was a study in the workplace looking at burnout that showed that people who had pictures of their kids or family on their desk had lower rates of burnout and higher performance. Why? Because everyone's job sucks at some point. But those pictures, served as a reminder of like, oh yeah, I am working partly because I'm providing for my family and my kids and giving them a better life and all these things. And it allows us to kind of tolerate those difficult moments. So what I often tell people is like, think of ways where you can create creative reminders. Even for athletes, I always tell them like, wear some sort of wristband or bracelet or whatever, or write it on your hand where it's like, you remember why you're doing this. And often it's not just why you're doing this, but that you're not only in this on your own. You have other people who are supporting you during these challenges. And it's not just you alone out on that 100-miler, even though it might feel like it. And that can help, handle these difficult moments as well.
Hey humans! Did you know you can officially join the Humans Outside 365 Challenge and score some really cool and exclusive challenge swag, including a finisher medal and a decal on humansoutside.com/challenge? You'll also get an outdoor challenge guide written by me for you, an exclusive challenge tracker, and insider info all year long. You don't want to be left out of this. There is never a wrong time to join the Humans Outside 365 Challenge. So get going. Join it today. Go to humansoutside.com/challenge to learn more now. Now, back to the show. So two things jump to mind. My friend Lisa Hellett, who just did Leadville, had an inspiration wall of photos in the Airbnb they were staying at before and immediately after the race. And I imagine she's using that exactly what you're saying, right? But the other thing that jumped to mind is that if folks go back and listen to the first episode of season 6 of this podcast, you can hear an episode with Dr. Cassie Holmes, who's a happiness researcher. And she talks about something very similar, that understanding the things you like about your job. So it's a very similar idea to your pictures on your desk. Like, I'm doing this for my family. That helps you persevere. She's saying you increase your happiness by focusing on the things you like about your job to push through the things you don't. And perhaps when organizing your time, working to pair those things with each other. So I actually have on my whiteboard for my full-time job right now a list of part of this exercise she had readers do of things I like about my job and sort of these core guiding enjoyments, so that when I'm like, oh my God, this is drudgery, I can, because every job has drudgery, right? I can look over and be like, oh yeah, I do really like that.
I love that idea because it's so true. And it's like part of the human mind, especially when you're going through those moments of drudgery, to kind of like grasp onto the negative. And what happens is when we grasp onto the negative, we often like ruminate on it, we let it grow and it spirals, and all of a sudden it's like, this is the worst job ever. But those subtle, simple reminders, what they do is they help pull you out of it. They help pull you back to reality, which is like, you know what? Every job has these things, but look at all these great, things and reasons that I do this that I'm not thinking about because I'm so focused on that negative piece. So I think, again, whether it's in the workplace, whether it's in our personal life, whether it's in our outdoor pursuits, is having those reminders in your life that allow you to realize that, no, I chose to do this for a reason. Like, I get enjoyment out of this for a reason, even if this seems miserable and I'm asking myself, why did I sign up for this race, or why did I choose this job, or whatever it is. But having, being intentional in your life to set those reminders up can be incredibly helpful.
So when it comes to building toughness, that's a valuable skill to have. Are you setting incremental goals for yourself and putting yourselves in situations that will be challenging for you, and then using the framework you described to tackle each of those things and sort of move the goalpost on being tough a little bit each day? Is that the idea?
Yeah, that's the idea. And it kind of works like this: is I like to think of it as your mind is a muscle. And when we think of toughness, we can also think of it as your brain has an alarm where it essentially freaks out if you go into anything challenging or anything like stress inducing. And what you're trying to do over time is kind of just gradually inoculate yourself to that. So that alarm gets a little quieter. It doesn't go away, but it kind of comes back to the realistic part where it's like, okay, this isn't life or death. So I don't need the alarm blaring to, a 10. It can stay at a 3 or 4, and you can manage it better. So I think when it comes to putting yourself in these situations, I'm all about like consistent small bites that are maybe just manageable. So just pushing your limits a little bit, but that you can take on and often get through, and sometimes fail, but often get through, which is like challenging yourself consistently over the long haul. And then the other thing that I think is really important when we talk about setting those goals is there are also challenges or things that resonate and feel authentic to you. So we've talked a lot about running because for us, for whatever reason, running is authentic to us. It resonates. If you're listening on this podcast and you're like, I don't want to do that sport, that's fine. Like, find something else, and it can be a physical challenge, but it also can't be. I have people all the time who I talk to about this stuff where it's just like, well, I'm really introverted, and my challenge is like going up and introducing myself to people, or getting on stage in front of my company and talking to, giving the talk or presentation. And I'm like, that's great. Like, slowly, gradually put yourself in those situations or volunteer for those spots where you can, again, kind of push your boundaries a little bit so you can turn that alarm down and develop that mental muscle.
Yeah, this is one of the reasons I love this, for me, love this challenge of going outside every day. Because the way it builds toughness is all you're doing is saying, I'm open to having whatever experience I have when I go and do whatever outside it is that I like to do. So some days that could be sitting on the porch. Some days for me that's going for a run. It's also become many other types of activities. So you're saying I'm open to having this. And then you're also saying I'm open to facing whatever's outside of my control, which 99.9% of the time describes the weather, which unfortunately is not in my control, or it would be beautiful and 65 degrees all the time. But because I cannot control that, and because I'm dedicated to having this habit, I'm actually accepting incremental challenges from the weather by going outside every day, no matter what. So I'm saying I am going to tackle this regardless of what comes. It is a small bite. I'm only going to do it for 20 minutes if that's what I can manage. And that's my standard, no less than 20 minutes. I'm only going to do it for 20 minutes. I'm going to go out. I'm going to take whatever comes. And then if at 20 minutes, I'm like, whew, we good. I'm going to retreat rapidly into my house where it is warm. And that's in the wintertime, that's true. Or if it's like just blowing or whatever, right? I'm going to come back inside where it's not raining. I'm going to come back into a safe space. When you're going outside, that safe space is literally physical, right? But if you were tackling a different kind of challenge, that safe space could be mental. I'm going to go back to somewhere that feels okay to me, and I'm going to do this every day, and I'm going to see what happens, and I'm just going to take it one day at a time, 20 minutes at a time.
I'm in 100% agreement, and I love how you've conceptualized that, because what you've essentially done is taken something that has a high level of uncertainty, which thanks to the weather is being outside, and often uncertainty causes us to spiral, to freak out, to come up with excuses for like, oh yeah, the weather is horrible, so I'm not gonna go do it. But what you've also done in that, and I think this is also clear and very important, what we get wrong about toughness is we often think toughness is like doing the big challenge, but it's the small ones consistently over time. So you've lowered the bar where it is essentially, no matter what the weather is, I know I can get out for whatever it is, like 20 minutes. And if that means sitting outside, that's sitting outside. That's okay. And when you lower that bar, it allows us to have that consistency where we're building that muscle over time, instead of thinking like, I'm going to wait until the weather is the worst and then I'm going to build this toughness. Well, you've missed all these other opportunities to build that habit and that consistency over time. So to me, it's again, and I use the same kind of example when I talk to people about, well, how do you develop an exercising habit? I say, well, rule number one is just get out the door every day. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that could mean I'm going to go jog a mile. Sometimes it could mean way further. Sometimes it could mean I'm just going to go out and walk because that's all I can manage today. But if you get that consistency of just get out the door, get out the door, get out the door, over time, again, if we think of it, like I said, in toughness, that alarm goes down, that kind of activation to do it kind of becomes a little bit easier. And it becomes this thing that is just kind of part of who you are and part of your life and benefits us over the long haul.
Now, you mentioned that this is a muscle. So I'm wondering if, like a muscle, you can lose it. So if I were to say, I'm good, I'm tough now, I'm not going to practice this anymore, I'm not going to do more tough stuff just because I'm trying to be more tough, Netflix for me. Okay. Is this something that you can lose? Is this a muscle that you have to continually work? Or is this something that is you create it and, it lasts a lifetime?
So there's two answers. I'll give you the nuanced answer first, is that the skills that you develop for navigating these things, maybe that inner talk, that purpose, those can last a lifetime, right? Because you have these skills, you've developed it, you've figured out how to cope or manage or like get through it. But in the other way, that kind of alarm that we talked about, that acts just like a muscle. So the easiest example I can give is for listeners, again, this has happened to me, is maybe I got injured running and I didn't run for a while and just said, oh, I'm not going to exercise. Well, the moment I get out the door and I say, okay, I'm going to go try and run again, that alarm goes off very quickly because my brain is like, what are you doing? You've been on the couch. Like you haven't done this in a while. Like you're breathing really hard. Sound the alarm. Stop, stop, stop. So it does detrain for a little bit. So that's where I think it's very important, again, to make this part of your life and make it a thing that is a practice. And again, it doesn't have to be physical. It can be psychological, mental. It can be whatever you want. But these moments where you're like, you know what, I'm going to challenge myself just a little bit to remind myself what it feels like so that my brain can kind of maintain that. Because I like to say it's a lot easier to maintain something than to build it up. It takes a lot more work to kind of build that. So if you've developed this habit, let's say, of getting outside every day for the last 6 months, well, the best thing you can do is, again, keep it simple and just like keep getting outside and maintaining that versus like letting that go and saying, oh, in a year I'll pick it back up, because it's going to be not as difficult, but almost as difficult as when you started that habit the first go round, because your brain has kind of adjusted and adapted and said, you know what? I don't need this skill. I'm going to turn that sensitive alarm back up, and we'll just kind of live in panic mode.
Well, this is why moderation is so hard for people, and by people I mean me. I have a much easier time doing things all the way. So I always joke that cold turkey is the only turkey I can have. I don't have a moderation button that I've developed, honestly. I can do something all the way. So let's use like a diet, for example, right? Can eat no sugar. I have no problem cutting sugar completely out of my life. But as soon as I start eating, I'll just, it's like a bowl of ice cream, but just after dinner, all of a sudden we're also having dinner ice cream or something, right? I don't have not practiced that ability to have that moderation. And so what I hear you saying is that that's part of toughness too, is like practicing the ability to hear what your internal monologue maybe is saying, address that and act accordingly.
Yeah, I love the diet example because if you look at it, people who are successful kind of find what works and then stick with that kind of whatever constraints they've created and stick with that sustainably over the long haul. The people who often fail in diets are the ones who like maybe take too big of a chunk and saying, I'm not just cutting out sugar, I'm cutting out this and everything. And they like can't handle that everything, so they start saying, oh, I'm going to allow this and this back in, and inevitably it falls apart. So it really is, the same kind of example is like choose something that is just beyond maybe your difficulty or challenge point at this point, but that you can handle over the long haul. And if you do that consistently over time, you're going to have that mental muscle, and it's going to be a little bit easier over the long haul.
Yeah. Well, Steve, thanks so much for this advice today. As a final thing, maybe you could walk us out. We're having our chat with you in your park. I think you and I have done this while running, although I'm probably way behind you. So you're shouting at me over your shoulder. Maybe walk us out describing a favorite outdoor moment. Like we're just hanging out somewhere that you harken back to or something that you remember very fondly.
Oh gosh, my favorite outdoor moment. So my wife and I love to travel to the national parks. So one of my favorite was just we were out on this hike in Yosemite, and it just starts like pouring for a minute. So we're like getting soaked. And at first your reaction is like, oh gosh, we're getting soaked. This kind of sucks. But then you just kind of look around and you're just like, this is awesome because like you're in nature, there's like mountains and trees all around, and you're just kind of experiencing it. And when there was no lightning, we weren't in any danger, and you're just like, it makes you feel alive and a part of something much bigger. So I often think back to not just that hike, but other hikes my wife and I have done, and it again, it really kind of energizes me and rejuvenates me.
And now you're tougher when you might get wet.
There you go. Exactly.
Steve, thank you so much for joining us on Humans Outside today. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for listening to this week's episode of Humans Outside. If you've enjoyed this episode, give us a little love and leave a rating and review to make it easier for others to find the podcast too. What you say matters. It really truly does make a difference. And until next time, we'll see you out there.